Welcome back. Always a pleasure to have you join again. For those of you who have not subscribed, do me the honor of subscribing. Hit that button so you get the notifications when new videos are released. Today's session, I want to speak to the men. Over the weekend, a song kept playing in my mind or around in my head, and I thought perhaps that song reminded me of my childhood days and would serve as an interesting conversation for today's session. Now, many of you, and I thought about perhaps playing a clip of what I'm using as a subject line for today's session. Many of you may be familiar with the R&B group Boyz II Men. Now, I titled today's session Boyz II Men, and that title has come from memories that I remembered back in high school, listening to Boyz II Men. For those who are not familiar with the group, a particular song came to mind, End of the Road. Although we have come to the end of the road, it's so natural. Beautiful love song. And as I reminisced on the song itself, I remembered the video, and I went back and I watched the video. And here were these young men. I guess it reminds me of how old I am. Looked very young. And if you notice in today's session's screen picture, those are the same men, but much older. And the transition from young men to older men is what I want to discuss in today's session. Beautiful song, great memories of my childhood days. And what it reminded me of is how time never remains constant. And that, like the wise person once said, when I was a child, I did childish things. I behaved like a child. But as I transitioned into manhood, I let go of my childish ways. The question I have for the young men is a simple one. Are you prepared? And are you willing to transition from your boyhood days to your manhood responsibilities? Your boyhood expectations, entitlements, to your manhood expectations. Now, let me, before I begin, give you 5 things that should keep as a signpost for everything I'll share in the next few minutes. The first is maturity. M for maturity. The second is manhood. The third, manners. The fourth, motivation. And number 5, money. What separates, and I think in many cases it's a razor's edge that separates boys from men. Those 5 M's determine how you can score yourself on the boyhood scale or the manhood scale. Now, one thing is necessary. We should transition from boyhood to manhood. However, most boys remain boys. Now, I should also state that I'm not talking about anything related to age. I have met young men half my age who have got more wisdom than men my age who have started to lose their hair and who have no hair. So age does not make you wise. And age in itself is not in the success equation. Wisdom is in the success equation. Time doesn't make you wiser. Time simply expands and magnifies the absence or the presence of wisdom in your life or success in your life. So the first thing I like to put aside is the whole idea that the journey or the separation between boys and men has to do with age. Yes, it plays an element, some part. But let me also make it clear, I'm referring here specifically to men who are 18 years and over. 18, you are still an adult. I'm not comparing a young boy who is 7 or 15, despite the fact that in the West, once you get into your teens, there should be a subtle movement and a transition from when you were still an adolescent. There should be a shift in your behavior. But I'm really comparing men that I speak to on this channel, 18 years and above. Age is not necessarily what separates a boy who is 18 and a man who is 40. And I'll talk about some of the things that perhaps are necessary, but let me begin by saying the following, and I'll come back to the ends. It's a software issue rather than a hardware issue. In other words, as a young man, you have physically, all things remaining equal, you have the same opportunities from a hardware position that an older man would have. As a matter of fact, you actually have a much higher SMV, sexual marketplace value, from a position of attractiveness and youth and beauty, all things remaining equal. So you've heard me talk about sexual marketplace value, which has to do with the visuals, attractiveness, youth, purity, chastity, your face, your body, fitness, physique, all of that. The younger a man is, the more he's more likely to be still an ultimate specimen of his creation. As we get older, myself included, we start to lose. Gravity starts to do its tricks, his magic. So recognize that I'm not talking about a hardware installation. Though relevant, you have all the attributes physically that an older man will have. And perhaps the best way to say this would be, if I were to compare myself to my younger self at 20, I would say that I still have, on the physical side, much of the attributes that I had when I was still 20 or 18. Yes, my hairline is receding. Yes, gravity is taking its toll. My muscles are no longer as firm. Yes, but I still have fundamentally, 2 hands. I'm grateful for that. Number of fingers, same number. I'm grateful for that. A mouth, 2 ears. I still have all my genitals in the same place, I believe. So from a hardware perspective, there is no separation between my 20-year-old self and who I am today, despite being more than twice the age of my 20-year-old self. However, there's a huge separation between who I used to be and who I am today. And that comes from the software installation. I like to use references that most people might relate to. If you have a computer, you can have the same computer, but every single year, what happens, which is interesting, is the manufacturer, for example, in this case, Microsoft, assuming you have such a computer that runs on the Microsoft software, will send you updates every few weeks or every few months or every year to encourage you to download and reinstall a newer version of the software in your system. We used to have Windows 5, Windows 6, Windows 7, Windows 10, 11, and it's continued to increase and progress. In other words, the software is being updated. A boy, therefore, is one who remains at the same software installation despite the progression of time. So, for example, at 14, you have a software installation. And let's say you get an upgrade. You have a software 15, and a software 16, and a software 17, and a software 18. When you get to 20, you have an update. But let's assume that you refuse or fail to hit that installation prompt that says, it's time to download the new software. And at year 21, you're still running on the 20 software update. At 40, you're still running on the 20 or 22 update. It simply means that on an annual basis, you are not updating your software, and therefore, although your hardware is still the same, on a software basis, you were still a boy and you haven't transitioned to manhood. Now, here is where the 5 M's I mentioned can deceive you into thinking that there is something progressive, or that progress is being made in a way consistent with how it should be made. I talk about 5 M's: manhood, money, motivation, your manners, and maturity. If you were to look at all of those 5, you could be born into a wealthy family and have all of your needs met courtesy of mom and dad. Therefore, money would never be an issue. You were born into wealth. So, as mom and dad's wealth increase, your allocation based on birth will also increase. So the mistake we make is believe, as young men, that as we start to gain more money or have access to more money, whether that be through inheritance or by converting our potential into actuality, we deceive ourselves into thinking that wealth or creating money or the ability to earn money makes you a man. It doesn't. It really, really doesn't. People can play the lottery and make money. It doesn't make them men. It's the mannerisms that come with the pursuit of that money, the character behind the decisions you make in that process, that determine whether the wealth you've created has been done in the right manner, consistent with what should be your manhood, under the same manners, but through the right motivation. Now, let me move back and perhaps address this in a different way. When I was growing up, I was proud of my father, absolutely proud of my father. Just an incredible man. And part of my journey as a man is founded on my father's character, my father's upbringing, me observing my father transition from a year-to-year basis. But I'll give you a good example. I observed my father reject opportunities to make money, and I was present. But I observed my father reject opportunities to make money that were not consistent with his moral character. They were not consistent with his ethics or his value system. It had nothing to do with religion. It just meant, from a philosophical perspective, he did not feel that that was the right way to make money. Why? Because his view was a simple one. The sins of the fathers live unto the 3rd and the 4th generation. That he could get fast money, but the problems he would create, whether those problems were paid back during his lifetime or beyond his lifetime, the net present value of that decision was a negative. So many a times he shunned opportunities to make money, and we went without, but we were still fulfilled because we could see that he had made the right decisions. His motivation was pure. So a young man who walks down the street and says, I need to make money, and because I do not have money, I'm not a man. I'm still a boy because I cannot provide. So therefore, I am going to find money by any means necessary. Now, this might include becoming an armed robber, robbing someone, and getting money, committing fraud and getting money, doing something illegal and getting money, doing something unethical or immoral and getting money. Now, yes, he has money when he has obtained it, and now he can provide, but does that make him a man? And my position is a simple no, because you have to connect the 5 M's. Firstly, your motivation matters. But your motivation is a function of the manners that you have been raised in. And here's a key point. The transition from boyhood to manhood requires being within proximity and having the opportunity to learn from great men or great people, present or through mentors that perhaps you come across, whether by books or their stories. But you have to learn discipline, delayed gratification, boundary reinforcement, controlled risk taking, all of which have to be installed in you at a young age. Your manners will inspire the level of motivation you have. Your motivation will lead you down a path towards maturity. Maturity will lead you down towards creating a frame, a manhood frame, and that would enable you to create money. But let's just put aside completely all the 5 M's. Let's just toss that aside. Let me juxtapose the concept of boys with the concept of men from a functional perspective, or perhaps from a motivation or desire perspective. Now, I talk about young boys, and I use 3 words. 3 words that motivate young boys and how they keep score. At the end of the day, men, we keep score. We are cost-benefit calculators. We believe in numbers. Rather, we should believe in numbers. And the way we keep score varies depending on whether we are still boys or whether we are still men. And perhaps here is the most important difference. As a boy, there were 3 things, and there are usually, generally speaking, 3 things that most boys will lean towards as a way of keeping score. The first, success. Now that success comes predominantly, the younger you are, especially below 18, from an academic perspective, because that is usually all of where your attention lies. Success. Academic success through study, taking exams. Now for those who perhaps have not had the opportunity or have preferred to take a different path to the traditional route of education, you keep score through success, through your apprenticeship process. The ability to master under someone and learn and work hard. But the key word is success. The second word is sports. Now, I was involved in sports from a very young age. I did a lot of sports. I excelled in a lot of them. Unbeknownst to me, I went into sports not necessarily because I wanted to keep score. I went into sports because I found that it kept me off the street. A funny way to make that statement, but true. I had the opportunity to be around other men, other boys. I also had an opportunity to use my energy and my drive in a way that had a shared value. Group sports, individual sports. And this is partly why you see young men start playing football, because they want to be celebrated, they want to be recognized, and they want to be lauded. We seek to be praised as young men, even as older men. So we choose sports as a way of showing our value and our difference and our uniqueness from other men. That's where the hierarchy begins. The whole idea about things not being equal. All men are not created equal. That's a useless and a stupid saying. We are not created equal. We are not equal in education. We are not equal in intelligence. We are not equal in looks. We are not equal in family upbringing. We are not equal in wealth. We're not equal. Just in pure, the SMV, sexual marketplace value, we're not equal. I have been around men who I look at and I say, these are very, very attractive men. Physically, they are specimens. I don't call myself equal to them. And I have been around other men who I think are geniuses, and I don't believe that I'm equal to them. Now, there's a saying that all men are created equal, but some work harder during their pre-seasons. Now, I'm not suggesting that we are not equal under the law. That's a separate conversation. We have equality of rights. That's a separate conversation. We should have equality of opportunities, but we know that does not exist, but I'll concede. Now, metaphysically, we are equal. Same spirit, one mind, one body. Granted, in the eyes of God, if you believe in him or it, we are equal. If you do not believe in God, then it doesn't exist. But I believe we have the same potentiality because it's the same mind, the ability to create and build something. But in the physical plane of consciousness, which is the world we live in, because we are in this world, there is a separation of hierarchy. Boys use sports as the first way, next to or second to education, to show that they are different. Now, the third is sex. And I'm not suggesting that all men, young boys, want sex, but there is something calling to a young man's ears about a woman's presence. It doesn't have to be physical, sexual intercourse, but it's a woman's presence, the desire to be around her, the desire for him to be chosen by her. So young boys use what I call the 3 S's to keep score. Now, when you move over to men, there's a transition. Men move from the S's to the P's. Provision, protection, the priestly duties, and professing his love through his presence. In a very simple way, that's how you keep score. But there's an overlap. I said before, if you're born into wealth, then you could be 18 and still be able to provide as an older man because you already have wealth. So provision and the ability to earn money through work is not necessarily something that you should think of satisfactory to profess your manhood and to shun your boyhood. In any case, one of the things to keep in mind, as I said before, the power of delayed gratification, the power of discipline, the power of focus, the power in sacrifice, giving up something of a lower nature for something of a higher nature. Now, I talk about Henry David Thoreau, and he said that if you will advance confidently in the direction of your dreams, and you endeavor to live the life that you have imagined, that you will meet with success, unexpected in uncommon hours. In other words, you have to know where you are. And boys, usually speaking, are not aware of where they are. You have to know where you're going to. Young boys are usually fuzzy about where they should be going to, or why they should be going there. Most importantly, you have to get going. Where am I? Where is my North Star? And what direction leads me in the fastest way to that North Star? Move confidently in the direction of your dream. So, men are those who have become aware of where they should be, who have recognized where they are, and are moving in that direction in a progressive manner. Now, would we squiggle sometimes? It's never a straight line, but we're moving in that direction. Boys are those who get stuck, who stay stuck. So let me ask you to inventory your life. Let's look back over the past 4 or 5 years. And this is no heat, no judgment. I'm not making a value judgment. I'm not even making a moral statement. Neither of those two are necessary for this conversation. But inventory your life and go back from 18 and ask yourself a simple question. Have you let go of your childish ways? Now, I'm not saying you let go of sports. And I'm still highly competitive at my age. Although maybe I cannot run circles around the younger ones like I used to, within sports. The body keeps the score, but I can still compete. And I still love sports, and I still watch sports, and I still encourage others to join sports. So sports is not how you separate boys and men completely. That's how younger men keep score. Older men keep the P's, but hold on to the S's also. Now, what I'm trying to get to you is that you have to go back to look into your past, look into your memory, and ask yourself a simple question. Are you progressively realizing that goal you desire? Do you have delayed gratification? Do you have any form of boundary reinforcement? Do you have a vision? Do you have a sense of self, a self-identity? Or are you always running back to dad and mum? A simple example is you live too close to dad and mum. So much so that you refuse to leave mum and dad's basement, to use a metaphorical example. You refuse to let go. Now, recognize that this is, again, no judgment. Moses Abraham was in the basement until about age 80. Moses was in the basement until about age 70. It's not where you are or how long you've been there that matters. It's whether you've come to the awareness that you need to get moving, because life is short. And in life, you're not remembered for what, perhaps what you said, or what you tried to say. You're really remembered for what you did and the positive impact or the change you brought about, maybe by what you said. But that can only occur to its fullest potential when you've discovered your purpose. And this is where we come back to the whole difference between men and boys. The razor's edge is the word purpose, the power of purpose. There is a separation, and I talk about this in I think my first book, The Best Chance. I think the first chapter was purpose. And I explain the separation between having a purpose-lived life or a purpose-driven life and knowing your purpose. I explain that your purpose is discovered. It's not given to you. You discover it. You don't necessarily choose it. It's the reason you were born. And I give 3 ways in which you can find your purpose. I won't go into that because that would distract me from today's session. But purpose is the razor's edge difference between boys and men. That at a point in your life as a boy, you come into contact with your purpose, or you come into contact with a purpose-driven objective. And that transitions you into responsibility for a man. Now, boys, generally speaking, in my experience, are spoiled. You're lazy. I used to be lazy. I used to be spoiled. There's a self-centered nature to being a boy. You've been raised perhaps to think the world revolves around you. I hate to say this, but there's almost an angle of self-narcissism where everything about your feelings is all that matters. If you feel upset, then the world has to stop. It's all about how you feel. You go on the whole my truth as a mantra rather than the truth. Now, that's a boy, and that's partly because of how the installation. Now, I said this in many sessions ago, that irrespective of who you are, our parents, there's a book I have read, and the title escapes me now, but what it says is, I think it said something like, my parents fucked me up, or fucked us up. And that is no heat, that is no judgment towards our parents. They gave us the best they had. Now, the purpose of the book, not my book, but the purpose of the book was, and the theme of the book was to say, up until the age of reason, 18, and up until your emancipation, well, actually, let me retract. Up until your emancipation, age 18, and up until the adult age, chronologically speaking, age 18, and prior to the age of reason, which can come before 18, your parents are responsible, your guardians are responsible, your environment is partly responsible, your associations are partly responsible for the installation software you have. At the moment you get to the age of reason, the ability to think, to reason deductively and inductively, to separate what is good and what is bad, to dream, to create, to build, to love and to laugh. You are responsible for the rest of your life. Now, our parents, our environment, our loved ones may have been responsible for who we are, and up until that age of reason. We are responsible for the life we choose to lead going forward. So I don't believe in this victim narrative that most men use. I often use the reference, pick up your cross and up the hill you go. Don't complain, don't explain. At any day, this is a piece of paper, at any day, you can sit down as a young boy or as a man and say the following words. I do not want to live my life like this any longer. And you can start to write. You can write the life you want to lead and the experiences you want to have. Take a piece of paper, find a space in your garden, find a quiet place, Travel to a quiet location where you're one with nature. Feel the soil, you're grounded, and start writing the life that you would like to experience. Once you've completed that list, that is a theory in principle. It's not a goal. You have to convert those words into flesh. But most importantly, you have to convert those words into results. That progressive movement is the journey of manhood. It's really that simple. Now, let me go back and say the following. Young men, therefore, are self-centered, lazy, require other people to look after them, almost at all times, have reasons why they blame everything that has happened to them. It's never their fault. It's always someone else. Have a sense of entitlement. The software ideology that runs on the boy image is arrogance, ignorance, and ideology. Now, when I was a young man, I thought I knew everything. You know, there were times when at even 15 or 14, I actually believed that I knew more than my father. The arrogance. I started to separate myself from my family, and therefore I started to pick up some ideologies. Now, if you're here in the UK, of late, it's the climate change ideology. So much so it's become a religion. Prior to that, perhaps it was a political ideology. But over the past 10 years, 15 years, it's been the empathy ideology. The idea that there are good people and there are bad people, and that you and a few are the only ones carefully selected who have empathy for the whole world and can change the world. Arrogance, ignorance, fueled by an ideology. That is the motivation, the fuel that burns in the hearts of a boy. Men, on the other hand, are driven by a different set of emotions. Duty, responsibility, obligation, honor, sacrifice. Now, if we go back to the beaches on Normandy, there were men who stood there and said, it's my duty, it's an obligation, it's my responsibility, it's the sacrifice I would make, and I lay my life down ever so gladly. Different ideology. Young men find the escape pathway. Now, over the weekend, I was having a conversation with someone about Ukraine. At the moment the crisis began, well, there was a general requirement that all men remain in the country, and the women and children could leave. Now, again, I hate to bring in politics, but at the moment that took place, there were some men who said, well, I don't want to be in a war. To hell with the country. What do I feel like and how do I want to live? And they were driven by laziness, self-interest, the spoiled attitude, selfishness, almost the narcissistic me-tooism, as I call it. Me, rather than the group. Rather than, I'm not saying you should go and, you had an obligation to fight in a war. I'm saying the emotion that came immediately was not the we, it was the I. That is a boy's mindset. Now, men, on the other hand, will think and ask questions. Is this the right thing to do? Is this the noble thing to do? And therefore, is this what is required of me? Men are driven by duty, obligation, responsibility. Boys are driven by happiness and pleasure. So here is another litmus test. Ask yourself a simple question. Are you driven by something greater than yourself? Or are you driven by self-pleasure, motivation, motivated by happiness, short-term gratification? Or are you being driven by delayed gratification? Now, most young boys say, and believe that you sow what you reap. Most men also believe and say you sow what you reap. Young boys do not understand the difference. There is a season to sow and there is a season to reap. And what you sow as a seed has a different gestation period. And that although you sow in a soil, you do not always reap in the same soil. That is where the manhood comes in. A boy thinks, I sow here, I reap here, which is where the selfishness comes from. A man, on the other hand, understands that you do not reap what you sow, but more importantly, you do not reap in the same soil that you have sowed. And you will also reap sometimes in a different season, through a different source, which is why men have more of a sacrificial approach to life, recognizing that sometimes the reward doesn't come during their lifetime, but just like the sins of the fathers move to the children up until the fourth generation, the blessings of the father also moves from the father up until the fourth generation. Now the great writing says that I will bless Abraham. I will bless Abraham because he would train and teach his children to walk in the way of the Lord. Isaac, therefore, will be remembered, and Jacob will be remembered. Why? Because Father Abraham was a good man, and he had the manhood approach, and he made the right decisions. He obeyed the laws. Now, here's another interesting one on the laws. The younger you are, the more boyish you are, the less reverence you have for laws. Now, I gave an example sometime last week about the command given from a father to a son, one on his deathbed and the other still a young boy. David on his deathbed called out for his son Solomon, and he said, I am about to go via the same pathway as my ancestors. So be strong and show yourself a man. Obey the laws, obey the precepts, respect the norms, follow the decrees. And if you do all of that, and you're honest in your dealings, you will be successful. Solomon was a boy, but he was given the charge of a man. Now I said, I have met young men who are wise and old men who are foolish. Here's a statement that you should keep close to your heart. I mentioned that sometimes the seeds that are planted in our hearts, the installation put in our softwares at a young age, will determine whether we transition from boyhood to manhood seamlessly and smoothly. However, I'm not suggesting that your past determines your future. No, because you can be a great father like David, and you can have an absolutely useless son, a despicable son like Absalom. You can also have an unwise father like Saul, and you can have a great son like Jonathan who loved David and was willing to step back because he recognized that David was the ordained king. Therefore, it's not your parents that make you. You make yourself, and you choose whether you transition from the boyhood to the manhood. And here is something I'll give you in closing. Now, we talk about the chemicals that run through our cells and our brains: dopamine, endorphins, serotonin, even cortisol, and one more that escapes me. Dopamine is a very powerful, it's almost like a drug. It's not a drug, but it can be, especially used negatively. Young boys are motivated by the dopamine effect. And the dopamine effect comes from self-pleasure. What can I do to please myself? Which is partly why, amongst young men, porn is a huge dopamine release. Playing video games, and excessively, is a huge dopamine release. For women, it could be perhaps that post that is liked those comments could be a dopamine release. Men, on the other hand, do not rely on self-pleasure. They rely on group pleasure, which is why a man can wake up at 4 a.m, and we go back to the hunter-gatherer days, and he can go into the wilderness alone, recognizing that his wife and the children do not have food. He understands he might get killed, maybe by a wild beast, but he goes nonetheless. And if he comes back home holding that game, he has pride in his heart, not because of his achievements, not because of what he accomplished, but because he gets to satisfy and provide for the group. Their pleasure gives him pleasure. It's more about group pleasure than self-pleasure. So, in closing, I would encourage you, because I do the same exercise even today, I would encourage you to think about whether you are still a boy or whether you are still a man. I said to someone at the weekend, it's time to grow up. I'm going to say to you, assuming I am speaking to you, son, it is time to grow up. It's time to wean yourself off of mother's breasts. Get dressed and go make yourself a man. Now, I hope today's session has been useful.